So for 3 years now, at the very least, I have been unraveling sweaters to reuse the yarn and recycle the yarn, especially thrifted luxury sweaters like made out of cashmere, merino, angora, silk. And I thought today it would be fun to kind of revisit that journey because I have a lot of ambitions for the future that I want to show you a little bit more about. But I think first we got to start where the whole process started at my first unraveling a thrifted sweater for its yarn video. So let's take a look at that.
Have you ever found the perfect knitting or crocheting pattern, especially larger ones like a blanket or a sweater, only to go buy that yarn and just had such a sticker shock? I love crafting, but sometimes the cost of yarn can really cause my wallet to shrivel in shock. Which is why today we're going to go over how to unravel thrifted sweaters so that you can reuse the yarn at a much more cost-effective price than what you can sometimes find when the sweater we're going to be unraveling today is this one from, I believe, American Eagle. It is a 55% cotton, 25% acrylic, 10% wool, and 10% silk blend. And I'm going to chat about some important aspects of unraveling sweaters if this is something that you want to do for yourself. The first thing that you're going to want to do is look at the seams. If the seams have some sort of overcast edge or some sort of edge that looks like it was sewn, that is not going to work because it means that the yarn was cut and you're just going to have a long string of yarn per row of your sweater. And I guess unless you have the time and patience to splice all of those ends together, you're not going to come away with a usable yarn. What you're looking for is a chain stitch that is holding the panels of your sweater together. I'll show you a little bit of a close-up of what this looks like, and you can see exactly what the chain stitch is. One side will almost blend into the knitting, hard to see. You know that your yarn is going to be untacked for each panel. You're going to be separating your sweater into panels to unravel. Pick up the sweater you're planning to unravel and the seam ripper, and let's meet at the craft table. Now, this sweater is ready to be unraveled, and the first thing that I like to do is turn it inside out to have better access to all of the seams that I'm going to be working on. So we're going to first split this sweater into all of its panels. Usually there's a front, a back, and one for each sleeve. This is a raglan style sweater, so you have a slightly different seam around the armhole, but what I find in many sweaters that I've unwound commercially is that the first seam that's easiest to do is the one that's under the arm because it runs continuously under the arm and down the side of the sweater. So what you're going to want to do is first find that chain stitch seam, and you'll find that the chain stitch seam, the chains themselves kind of look like they are running in a particular direction. There's a particular orientation, the bottom of the V and the top where it's pierced by the previous chain stitch. There's an easy way to unravel chain stitch and a hard way. And the easiest way is this orientation being up, and you're going to follow this orientation all the way to the other end, which will be here at this part of the sleeve. Sometimes I won't unravel at the cuff because the cuffs tend to be a little bit difficult, so I'll leave that for later, and I'll skip to past where the ribbing is, and I'll start unraveling here. So you can see you want to unravel where your chains look like this, and not on the other end. That becomes difficult. So how I like to do it is I like to put my seam ripper right underneath that top chain that I want to start unraveling at and just rip through it. You want to be a little careful to not catch any of the yarn underneath because we want that to stay intact, but we do want to rip through at least the first stitch of the chain. Then you'll have kind of a loop sticking up, and I won't go into that loop, but the one that it's sticking through, and I'll kind of pull on that to release the loop before it. And now we have a loose end. Mine gave me some trouble, so I'm going to go back down below here and loosen that again until I get kind of like a loose end that I can pull on freely. And as you pull on that, you should just see your chain stitches unraveling. At a few points down the line, I like to separate my panels, and at this point you can even kind of pull on the bridge in between. It comes apart quite easily at this point. You can kind of see we're just unraveling a chain stitch. Sometimes it can get a little dicey here at the bottom of the arm because you have two of these chain stitches crossing each other, but oh, that wasn't so bad. Even that one came apart under the arm. Sometimes that doesn't happen, but it was easy on this sweater. And we keep going. all the way down, sometimes pulling like this because you can get some felting in here that can kind of glue the panels together a little bit stronger. Sometimes you'll have some issues once you get to the tags because these are sewn on. So I'll just carefully go through and remove with the seam ripper all the stitches on that tag. I personally like to save the tag, and with a little safety pin I will attach it to my unraveled sweater so that I can remember where I got the sweater from, and most importantly, the contents of the yarn. Like, what is the yarn made up of? Because I like to know. And the more of these stitches that you can undo when you're taking the tag off, the better, because you don't really want those threads to hang around, because those will continue to hinder your unraveling process. Just gonna try to pick out some of those threads. And we're past the point of the tag, coming right down here. And then, like I said, sometimes when it gets to the ribbing, there seems to be sometimes a different sort of yarn used, or an additional bit of thread, so it can be a little bit difficult, but I find that the sleeve cuffs are the toughest for me. I have a long-term project I'm working on where I save these bits of yarn for, so I put it in that container. You're free to do with it what you want. A lot of times yarn companies will use the exact same yarn to sew up a sweater that they use to knit it, so you can also attach it to your unraveling, but it's usually such a small piece that I don't take the effort to do that. So you're just going to continue doing that with all of the seams that you find, and I'll show you any tricky ones that I come across, but I will probably just meet you again when we have all of these panels separated. My sweater is now successfully separated into all of its parts. Here we have one sleeve. Oh, I still have to do the cuff on this one. Okay, good thing to note. We have the other sleeve here, and a front panel and a back panel. So the next step in our unraveling is to actually unravel each panel. The big thing is that we want to find out which end was the cast on end. It is a little bit easier with this sweater because it's already, where it was attached to the collar, it wasn't fully cast off. It looks like they used live stitches, so it's already starting to unravel here. And if it's not like this is the first time I've seen this actually, so mostly what I'm looking for, there'll usually be like a little bit of a tail somewhere here of what they use to kind of secure that end here. So that is mostly what you're looking for. In this I'm not going to need to, but I find it easiest when I do have a sweater like that is just to cut that off, because it can be a little bit difficult to unpick, and I would rather waste, quote unquote, waste that yarn, although I have other uses for it, so I don't feel so bad. And you'll find out about those uses in a future video, I promise. So maybe you can use it for a similar thing, but I find it easier to cut off very closely to that and then unravel from there. So you want to just use that as your starting point. So let's start with maybe, kind of looks like the back. Okay, so we'll start with the back. And before I start unraveling, I usually try to get just one nice long continuous bit of yarn coming from my panel before I put it on my equipment, whether that be a ball winder or a swift, just so that, you know, the fiddly process of starting it is out of the way. I usually find that the start tends to be a bit fiddly. How I like to do it is I like to pull apart a little bit on the stitches, and then I'll pull up. You'll see, like, this is the same thing that happens when I cut away that cast off edge. I get these little fuzzies, so I just try to clear that a little bit because I want a nice smooth start. I have an unraveling machine, which I'm just going to show you in a second, and that means that just having a nice smooth start is important to get that working well. Okay, so the next quote unquote complication with this sweater, and I have it in about half of the sweaters that I find that are commercially knit, is that this was knit with two yarns at the same time. So you can see them here, and you might question, like, well, why can't you just unravel them as if they were one? And they're knit into each other. So if I pull on this left one to unravel, you can see that we're getting stuck here. And the reason we're getting stuck is because you need to first unravel the second one, and then even if I were to continue pulling on the second one, I'm going to get stuck and caught on this first one again. So it has to be an alternating, you know, you unravel this one and then you unravel that one. And then you unravel this one and then you unravel that one. Now, this is part of the precise reason why I built my unraveling machine, which I'm just going to show you right now because it makes this bit so much easier, and if it isn't like this, it makes the process totally hands-free.
Before we continue with the extremely satisfying process of undoing all of this knitting, I want to take a second to talk about today's sponsor, Brevo. Brevo is an all-in-one platform for email marketing, automation, and customer management. With Brevo, I can set up a simple newsletter sign-up and automatically send things out to everyone who joins. And I can follow up later with updates, new patterns, or projects without having to manually track anything. So, for example, if you want to be part of the first group of people to hear about my next sweater pattern, which is actually the sweater that I'm wearing right now, make sure you sign up for the Engineering Knits newsletter using the link down below. It's also not just an email. You can do things like SMS and automation. So if you're running any kind of creative business or honestly just want a better system, then I'll remember to email people later. Brevo gives you a way to keep everything organized in one place. You can check it out at the link below and use my code to get 50% off the starter and standard plans for your first 3 months. Thank you so much to Brevo for sponsoring today's video and making videos like this even possible. And let's get back to my enormous pile of sweaters to unravel.
So what you see here is my unraveling machine, and it is maybe not the most robust piece of equipment, and I actually have more parts coming tomorrow to improve that setup a little bit, to make it a little less tied together with twine. And if you want to see more about this unraveling machine, make sure that you're subscribed, because the next video that'll come out likely will be about how I came up with the design for this and how I built and put together this skein winder, or unraveler as I like to call it. So let's set up the panels and I'll show you exactly how I use it, especially on these tricky ones where it's 2 yarns knit together as one. Okay, so the first thing that I usually need to do is I need something to hold the panel as it's being unraveled. So I like to use one of these pants hangers that have the clips on either end, and I clip it onto ribbing end on either side, and then I hang it up on something. For me, it's my blinds, and that kind of holds the panel while I unravel it. So it hangs up there on my patio window, on the hanger, on the blinds. And then I have my hands free to unravel from the bottom right here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up one of these strands to go through my unraveler. Now that I've fed the one strand of yarn through my unraveler, the other one I'm going to put through a ball winder. So I'm going to set this up next to my unraveler on my desk and feed the other strand through that. I'm a little concerned about the quality of this wool. The sweater seems to be a little bit felted, so I'm worried that my unraveler has a little too much torque and is going to rip the yarn, but we'll see how this works, hopefully. Cross your fingers for me. All right, now the second strand of yarn is set up. This is not going to be a fully automated process. I was hoping with my unraveler this could be fully automated, and I might be able to make it so in the future. I have some more design ideas that I'll discuss. But I do have to sit here, so the unwinder is going to take care of one of the threads, and I'm going to have to do the other one manually by hand with the unwinder. However, it's still so much easier if the winder can handle one than if I have to handle both, because I just don't have enough hands for that. If you're doing this at home without the extra unwinder, it is possible, it's just a bit tedious. It's hard to tell, at least I haven't been able to tell in a store, when the sweater made with one yarn versus 2 interknit like this. If anyone has been doing this for a while and knows, let me know and let everyone else know so that we don't pick up sweaters with this complication. It is possible to do it by hand, but it takes more patience, sometimes that I don't have. Moment of truth, we are going to turn on the unwinder. I have used this before to successfully unwind other sweaters. For example, these 2 skeins were fully from using the unwinder. I'm just not sure with this wool and it being felted how well it's going to do. So let's turn it on and let's see if it works. That might have been a little hard for you to see. It does work. I'm just not keeping up very well with my manual ball winding, so the yarn broke. So I'm just gonna have to pace myself a little bit better, and I think it'll work. So let me also put you in a slightly different angle because I think it's a little bit dark from this direction.
If I didn't have my unwinding machine, I don't think I would have continued trying to unravel this sweater. It was a very felted, so instead of doing it continuously, I would unravel by hand for a bit and then wind up both at the same time. But I just wanted to show off my unraveler a little bit because I was super proud of it. So here is a sweater that's knit up with just one thread, and the unraveler is handling the unwinding of a sweater panel all on its own, and I think it is such an exciting thing to watch a unwinding machine work and work so smoothly and just how I envisioned.
Okay, so we have unwound the sweater panels. I'm actually still working on them, but I wanted to kind of let you know what happens next while I'm working through the rest of them. But you'll have unwound them and found them to look almost kind of like ramen noodles. There's a lot of memory in the yarn for the stitches that it used to be in on the sweater it was in before. This is a bit difficult to knit with when it has that kind of memory, and on top of that too, we haven't actually washed this sweater at all. So what I like to do now is put it through a washing cycle. First, I will put it through some cold water and a gentle detergent. A lot of times I'll just use my laundry detergent, and you don't want to, especially if it's real wool, you don't want to like agitate it. You just kind of want to squeeze it around and swish it around, and sometimes I let it soak in there. After it's soaked in there for a good amount of time, I will rinse it off in cold water. Again, you want to minimize agitation. You really want to avoid felting your yarn. That would be really sad. If the yarn has wool content in it, I will like to do a last rinse with a diluted vinegar solution. Wool really likes vinegar, and it is another like deodorizing. After that last step, I will wring the yarn out and hang it up to dry. I like to use hangers on my shower rod, and I usually let that dry at least overnight. You want it to be fully dry before you start using the yarn. And I guess at this point we have a few options. You can either use the yarn right away as it is, or we have a few other things to talk about that you can do and that I like to do. This is what the yarn now looks like after a wash. It still has a little bit of that stitch memory in it, but it is a lot less pronounced than it is before. And I'm just knitting up a swatch so that you can see that this yarn is perfectly usable in its current state. And this is what a knit up swatch of my new yarn would look like. I think it looks great, but I actually unwound this sweater with a very specific use case, and that was to use it at a higher gauge. So I need a thicker yarn, and you saw that in the second gauge swatch, and so I'm actually going to be plying it together with some other unraveled sweaters that I have to get it up to the gauge that I need to and make the yarn thickness that I need to. In order to ply sweater yarn though, you have to run it through the spinning machine twice. First in a Z or S twist to give it that energy back, and then you ply it in the opposite direction. So here is all of my sweater yarn unraveled. These are most of the petals together except for the one that I've already plied, and I absolutely love the kind of tweed look of this sweater yarn. It is going to be absolutely perfect for my use case. I spun it together and plied it together with slightly warmer beige tones, which you can see is the start of the cardigan that I'm working on down below. Feel free to subscribe if you want to know what exactly I'm knitting, because I will be talking about that very, very soon. But yeah, this is how you unravel a sweater and turn it back into yarn that you can reuse for your own purposes. Please let me know if you start unraveling sweaters. I want to see results, and feel free to like and subscribe because we will be continuing this series on unraveling sweaters and knitting up some very interesting knits very, very soon. I learned a lot in that process, and I'm very glad that I did. My unraveling machine was definitely not the most sturdy, but it did the job, and I was actually able to reuse that yarn after I spun it together with a few other unraveled sweaters. I really like the jacket I ended up making from this yarn, so we can take a little bit closer look at the jacket that I made for a 1940s capsule wardrobe project. The last piece is a vintage knit jacket. I'm going to go between calling it a jacket and a cardigan. I should have just picked one term, but I'm sorry, I'll be between either a jacket or a cardigan. Alright, so
I wanted to discuss some progress that I had made. This particular jacket or cardigan, I think they call it a little bit more of a jacket. So we are doing the back panel here, and it has us working with stitch decreases and also different needle sizes. I think it's a little hard to tell at the moment because the sides are curling in. It's interesting because in the illustration, the jacket does look quite boxy, but there is a concerted effort to have a little bit of a waist cinch happening in the back panel. So even though the jacket is overall boxy, I'm thinking it will gently pull in around the waist area. I've sewn up the side seams, shoulder seams, sleeve seams, and I've set the sleeve into the armhole. I am liking the length. I'm like borderline about it, to be honest, but it is hitting where I had wanted it to hit. Unclear though if that's where it'll continue to hit once I set in the second sleeve and add the border. So that's what's left. Ready? Let's go over it. Setting in sleeve number 2, knitting and attaching the garter border all the way around, adding buttons, and then sewing all of this down and then weaving the ends. So close, and yet that just sounded like a lot of work.
2 hours later.
Sleeves are evil. They're 100% sleeveless. This is the sleeve I did first. This is the sleeve I'm nearly done on. Can you spot the difference? I'm sewing it on inside out and I was almost done and now I have to undo it all and I tied knots. I'm sad. I think that deserves a chocolate to make me feel better.
1 eternity later.
It took some time, but it's fixed. We've got 2 sleeves attached, and now I'm going to knit a garter strip that will go all the way around this edge. So I think the next time that we'll see each other is for the final reveal. I hope you enjoy. Didn't show me knitting the garter stitch border to this cardigan because it ended up being a little bit of a last minute rush, as you'll see next week, but I still think that it turned out really well, if not slightly tight. I wish I would have sewn it on a little bit looser. So I was really happy with how this jacket turned out at the end. I actually have to find it. I've moved, so things are kind of all over the place. But from here, I decided to kind of go over the process of how I ended up with the unwinder that I did. Unraveling a sweater to harvest the yarn to reknit is a really rewarding experience, and I think you all liked it very much last time when I went through it. But I also promised I would walk you through the process of making the unraveler, how I came to the idea and how I designed it, so that's what we're going to do today. Though I warn you, it is far from straightforward, and I nearly gave up a few times.
For those of you who have been around for a few years, then you'll know that the reason why I picked the name engineering knits is because I am in fact an engineer. However, I'm a chemical engineer and a software engineer, not a mechanical engineer, so I don't know much about building machines, but I have always loved taking things apart and trying to put them back together or trying to make new things for the use cases that I'm interested in, I want to do. And I love machines specifically related to yarn and fiber making and knitting. But to give you a little bit of a picture of where I got the idea from this unwinder, let me walk you through how I used to unravel sweaters by hand. So first you unpick the seams of your commercially knit sweater until you have nice flat panels. Then I would unwind a little bit at the top of each panel. Now you can also do this by hand and just wind it into a ball from there. That seemed like it would take forever, so I used my ball winder. Since I was going to wind it into a ball anyway, I decided to put it into my ball winder, unravel from my sweater panel to my ball winder. However, my yarn still had the memory of the stitches it was in. I wanted to be able to wash it. It's not a great idea to wash it in a cake like that. So I would wind it back from my ball onto my Swift and then wash it. When I was thinking through this idea, I wanted an electric ball winder and an electric Swift or an electric skein winder. Do both of these exist? Yes, they do. Do they cost a lot of money? Also, yes, there's quite a few options for electric ball winders, but they are pricey, but I felt like I could make one maybe. And then the next portion for me was to make an electric Swift. Looking under electric Swift, I found nothing. Looking under electric skein winder, I found one, which looks beautiful. I love the idea, but is eye-wateringly expensive in my personal opinion. So I thought, can I make this myself for less than a combined price of maybe like $800 or $900. Also, as a little warning, this process has taken months and months because I nearly gave up. So unfortunately, in the intermediate time, I have also lost a little bit of footage. So I'll do my best to kind of fill in the gaps, but it might mean that this video is particularly chatty. If you see my unraveler already, then you'll know that I did not end up making an electric ball winder, but I was highly convinced that this was the right way to go for a long time. I had kind of a few ideas on how I could make my electric ball winder slightly different from the ones that I saw online. As far as I could tell online, they're basically on or off. You can either have the ball winder winding yarn or not. But when I was unwinding my sweaters by hand and I was using my ball winder manually, I realized that what I really liked was the ability to control the speed at which I was unwinding. You would sometimes get to a little bit more felted sections of the sweater panels, and I liked going slower in those sections so that I could control the tension on the yarn and hopefully not rip it as I was unwinding it. So I was hoping to get a way where I could do variable speed control on my ball winder, and I was also thinking still at the time that I would be holding the panel that I was unraveling in my hands so that I could better control how the unwinding was going to, which meant that I wanted my hands free from the control of the speed of the machine, aka I wanted a pedal like a sewing machine. So my mind jumped immediately to why not use the motor and control device of a sewing machine in order to power this e-winder. But it turns out that they sell conversion kits for non-electric sewing machines to becoming electric sewing machines, and it comes with a sewing machine motor that connects to a variable speed control foot pedal, which is exactly what I wanted. But as I was kind of designing this, I thought, well, can't I use the same motor to power my ball winder and the Swift? So I was thinking I could just have one motor that I could switch the operation from the ball winder to the Swift when I needed it. To facilitate that, I also found this gearbox. It has a set of shafts that are connected by gears that are offset by 90 degrees to each other. It's also a 20-to-1 ratio because you want Swifts to turn slower than ball winders. When I got my engineering degree, a required class for me was drafting. I did also have required classes to do like AutoCAD and all those 3D modeling and drafting courses as well, but we also had to learn how to do it by hand. So I decided to lean into that bit of my education, which is over a decade ago now at this point. My gosh, it's like almost 15 years at this point. Thought, why not kind of bust out those skills, not in any great detail, but just a little bit, to try to explain how I was thinking about how to put all these pieces together to create an unwinding machine. Okay, so I finished with my drawings. Here is a top-down view of my design. So we have the sewing machine motor here, which is connected to the 90-degree gearbox. The top of it is connected to the Swift,
and the side of it is connected to the ball winder. For a slightly different perspective, here is a side-on view. So again, we have the sewing machine motor. So this is as if you're looking from the side. So the sewing machine motor, which in the back is connected to the gearbox. It's 90 degrees. The one sticking up will be connected to the yarn swift over here, and the one from the side will be connected to the ball winder. So I have, I think, finally all the supplies that I need to do this. Well, I lied. I don't have everything I need. I can't find my handsaw. I don't have any power saws, so I'm gonna go back to the home improvement store and pick up a handsaw. I think they say, like, what is it, at least 3 trips to your local home improvement store to do any kind of project like this. I think this is at least trip number 3 for me, if not more. Okay, I'll see you in a second. After finally getting all of my supplies together, it was time to start the assembly of my machine as I had imagined it from the drawing. So the first thing I did is I anchored the sewing machine motor to some wood blocks that I had in the orientation that I would hope would be able to connect it to my little gearbox that I could then hopefully also connect to my e-winder and my swift. What I'm working on here is a disassembled Knit Picks ball winder. When I was doing this, I was trying to connect the gearbox to the ball winder via a belt, and I couldn't see a way to connect the belt and the gear to the handle of the ball winder because all the parts were a bit slippery plastic and it was exactly molded into shape. I don't have any issues using this ball winder manually with the way that it's constructed. It just didn't really work for what I was trying to do, so I disassembled it to replace the main shaft with a metal one. It wasn't pretty, as you can see, but I did manage to replace the main shaft with a metal one that I could attach a, like, I don't even know exactly, honestly, what it's called. I'm sorry, I don't know the right terms, but it's a thing that you put the belt on when you have a belt-driven component. And then I reassembled the ball winder to try and test it out with a motor to see if, even without the gearbox in the middle, if the motor would be able to drive my ball winder. The belts I had were either way too short or a bit long, like this one, so I needed to put my ball winder quite far away to get enough tension on it so that the sewing machine could actually rotate the handle of the ball winder. But here is my first test. Okay. Buoyed by that success, I moved on to the Swift because I wanted to, once again, before I put the gearbox in, ensure that the Swift would work directly from the motor first. And this is where I started running into problems. I couldn't find a way to anchor that little gear onto the shaft of the Swift tight enough so that the motor would turn it, but also it wouldn't slip on the shaft itself. I had a lot of issues with it slipping, and this is one of the points where I wanted to give up on my idea, to be honest. I had a lot of grand plans and grand ideas, and well, it didn't work. The motor started smoking, things weren't turning anymore. It wasn't right. At this point I had come so close a few times and it was pretty dejected about it when suddenly it came to me that I have a drill. And the reason why that came to me is this. Hold on. As I was walking back to my craft table, I saw my kind of jerry-rigged situation here with this sticking out of the side of my ball winder. I think that could fit into the end and I can use this instead of a drill bit. I use my drill to turn my yarn winder. And yeah, it worked. It is so noisy though. All the plastic parts do not agree well with the force that is being put on it by my drill. I'm not going to subject my neighbors to that. I can barely subject myself to that, let's put it that way. However, I then realized the reason I want to build this whole machine is to make it easier for me to unravel sweaters. And when I unravel sweaters, I actually want to unravel them into skeins. So I prefer to unravel my sweaters into skeins and then wash the skeins to relax the waves. So what I was originally doing with the yarn winder was actually adding a step because I would then have to go from the yarn winder to the swift. I then realized that when I was modifying this swift, I was able to take the bottom of this off, and does this look familiar to you? Yes, I can use it as a drill bit as well, and it does work. Now, a few caveats to making sure it works well. I mean, I guess you could hold it upright, but then you have the danger of smacking yourself in the face with it. Ask me how I know. You could hold it sideways, but you do then, like, you would build muscle if you held it that way for long enough to unravel a whole sweater. I want a way to hold this up sideways while I unravel a sweater, and I was looking around my room to see if there was, like, I was thinking maybe I can drill a hole through the pieces of wood that I have, and I found my bookends. And if I just clamp that onto a side table that I have, I could use that to set up a whole unraveling setup. And like I've done previously, I use a hanger that have the clips on it, usually meant for pants, to clip up the section of sweater that I'm unraveling to hold it in place. And then I can just sit there and use my drill to unravel my sweater. Perfect! Like, I'm super happy with that. That piece now goes so much faster than when I was doing it by hand. And honestly, this is also a lesson in simplicity. Sometimes when I think through engineering projects, I go very fancy very quickly. Just thinking simpler can really create like that breakthrough and those items that are still very reusable, but just so much easier to create. I was really overthinking it in the beginning.
Having the direct drive on the shaft of the swift and it's sitting horizontally, this was kind of a big breakthrough for me. The only issue with what I have now is I still had to sit there and by hand hold that drill. So I wanted to create something a little bit more hands-free, which is when my brain went back to that electric skein winder that I found when I was first looking up, do machines like this exist? And it made me realize that this machine, this electric skein winder, was very, very similar to the concept that I had just come up with, but they just had so many better ideas and ways to go about it. So I decided to try to create my own version of this electric skein winder. I started off with an Amish swift to get that kind of windmill arms. The way an Amish swift works is it has a crossbar, an X with pegs on it. The pegs are removable, and then that sits horizontally, like flat on top of a horizontal surface and spins in this direction. I wanted, instead of it sitting on top of a surface like this, I wanted to put it up like that, more like the windmill. The only problem that I had when I was thinking about this is that it is very flimsy. I bought the least expensive Amish swift that I could find online, and it's not the most sturdily constructed, so my first task was super gluing all the bits together that I could to hopefully give it a little bit more structural integrity. You don't want to glue the fourth peg though, because you do need at least one peg to be removable, so you can take your yarn off after you're done. As for the motor, my drill could work and has worked, but I do have other projects I'm working on where I need a hand drill. So you might have noticed, and a few of you pointed out, that the motor that was driving my unraveler for a time was my hand mixer. And that is the state of my unraveler that you saw in the last video. It was not the most stable. Pieces would come flying off, and more twine had to be used to hold the mixer in place and make sure it was steady. And as time went on, it got louder and louder. It wasn't as bad as the earlier iterations, but it was still definitely a loud machine when it was running.
It's been a few weeks since I've worked on my wonderful unraveler that I'm sitting next to here. It has unraveled a few sweaters, but the motor of my mixer is starting to sound really sad. I'm not going to turn it on because it's also really not secured well. You can see I've literally tied it in place with twine. So in the meantime, I have actually bought myself a few supplies, and rather than thinking about some grand design from the start, I'm going to work step by step and see if each bit works. So first we're going to be starting off with a DC motor and figuring out how to power it correctly and safely.
I could have ordered this DC motor, rheostat, and wire coupling from the beginning, but to be honest, I was intimidated. I looked up motors and there was a lot of information about rewiring your 3D printers or those RC cars that you can build, and I was just like, you know what, I need something simple, and this seems really intimidating. These were really the only three things that I needed in order to make a working motor that had variable speed control. Who knew? now I know. Hopefully now you know too, if you didn't already know before and you were yelling at me this whole time that it would just be super simple to use this instead. It's also much more cost effective, at least in the US where I am. It's pretty inexpensive to get these pieces. I was pretty ecstatic when I got the motor to work, and it was pretty quick to then rebuild my unraveler from working with a hand mixer to working with this DC motor. I had to redo the height a little bit of some of the parts and make sure everything was connected. And then the last thing that I had to tackle was my fourth peg becoming a projectile when I was unraveling sweaters. The tension was too much from unraveling sweaters, and it would just come out of its hole at such a speed. I'm glad it wasn't aimed at me. So I decided to replace the removable peg with a removable bolt. I drilled a hole through the arm that it was attached to, and I attached a large bolt with a hex nut that makes it easy for me to remove when I'm done unwinding a panel. But as you can see, the motor was not loving the weight imbalance. The bolt that I use is quite heavy, and it's on a very long moment arm, so it was really struggling to get it around, and I thought that would not be a great thing for the motor in the long run. So to balance that out, I just replaced the peg on the opposite side of the one I already had to balance that out perfectly. Originally I was like, I have to do all four, and then I was like, wait, no, I need it to be balanced across the whole movement, which means I only need to replace the one peg with a bolt as well, and that ended up working really well. Now why don't I give you a tour of the unraveler in its current, much quieter, and I think much more robust iteration, although probably not its last iteration.
We're at my new and improved unraveler, and I wanted to take you through kind of a list of the tools that I used, or components and parts, and how I connected them, just in case you wanted to recreate this and reconstruct this on your own. I also saw on my last video that you all had some wonderful ideas. Trust me, this is not the last version of my unraveler. It definitely needs some tweaking, and there's so many ideas and I love it. So the bit that hasn't changed from my hand mixer edition is the Amish Swift out front. I like it quite a bit. The only thing is, as you might have seen before, the pegs pop off really easily. So they are all super glued in, and then in order to have a removable one, I got these long bolts, and the one that's removable has a wing hex nut on the, like a wing nut on the back that I can easily undo with my thumb, and a hex nut on the front that I can kind of tighten against. The opposing side had the same thing done. So all I did is I drilled through the center of one of the peg holes that I chose, put the bolt and nut through, and on this top one we don't have any wing nuts because I don't remove that one, so it's just hex nuts that are tightened in place on both sides. I used the exact same bolt to connect from the Swift portion to the motor portion, and I tightened the Swift to the front of the bolt using a wing nut. I guess I could have also used a hex nut, but sometimes when I've accidentally improperly set up my Swift on something, like it gets caught or something like that, or this isn't clear of like this pull that I have here, this will untighten, so it's nice to have the wings on there, and then I can just finger tighten it back, and then that kind of keeps the Swift moving on the same axis, like at the same time as the bolt is moving. So that's how the Swift moves together with the bolt. It's just anchored to some 2x4s here. That hasn't changed much at all, that I've just sawed into place and then drilled through. The bolt is connected to the motor with a coupling. Now this is a flex coupling, and if I were to do it again, or if I would to change anything, I would not change the flexible coupling personally, just because I don't have a ton of precision when I'm doing this. Maybe if you had some more precision equipment or like better alignment of things, you could use a non-flexible coupling. The flexible couplings are a little bit more expensive, but if there's any kind of wonkiness in the angle at which the Swift is operating versus where the motor is, it gives it that kind of degree of freedom, so it's not going to break off. I did use a 6mm coupling on both ends. I had to kind of file down the bolt for it to fit. There are some non-flexible couplings that I found that are 6 to 6.3, which might work a little bit better for these bolts. And I also don't necessarily want to use a bolt in the future. It was just like the quickest way that I could think to anchor this Swift to something. And I already had a pack of them because I needed it for the Swift removable pegs that are actually anchored in place so they don't fly off. But that is then connected to a DC motor. So this DC motor is 100 RPM. Going forward, if I were to redo this, I mean, I'm not going to get rid of this motor because it works, but 100 might be a little too much. So I use a variable speed control right here, and I don't really ever go past the first setting. So I would go down to 50 RPM or maybe even 20. At least for me, this is sold, I think, going pretty far down. I would go between 20 and 50. And that way I'd have a little bit more range of control versus right now I have to do like very minimal adjustments. So 100 is a little bit quick for what I'm trying to do and the size of the Swift that I have. I use the bracket that the company sells to mount the motor on. I like the bracket quite a bit. It was easy to anchor in place. The screws were a bit tiny and it's a little awkward. Like I couldn't get to the screws very well around the motor, so they're not all completely flat. And yeah, I lost a screw. They're so small. One went missing, but so far it's done okay, so I don't think it's too bad. The motor does not come with wiring of any kind, so I bought this. How do you pronounce rheostat?
Okay, I found this on the web for how do you pronounce rheostat. Check it out.
Rheostat. Okay. I found this rheostat plug. This one came with, the reason I like this one is because it had the dial directly on the plug right here, and I knew that I have a plug on my desk, so I would be able to easily reach this control dial. This can directly control the speed of a DC motor. The end of this came with either you could like plug wires into it directly, or you could plug it into something. I decided I didn't want all the extra wiring, so I just cut it off at the top. And I used a pair of stripping pliers, like electrical pliers, to strip off that extra insulation, and I separated the positive and negative, and I connected, there's like a plus and a minus on the back of the motor. I wired it up, and then for my test, the wires were exposed. I really didn't like that. I have shocked myself in the past doing some fun electrical projects. I didn't want to do that here. So I found some shrink insulation that you can put around wires. I think mine is like marine rated potentially. I just wanted something that would shrink and go around it easily. So I liked that a lot. You're supposed to use a heat gun with it. I don't have a heat gun, so I just used a lighter. That worked fine. I don't know if you're officially supposed to recommend that, but you know, I don't have a heat gun, so I just used the lighter. And now when I plug it in and I turn it on, it spins. Something you might not have seen because while I'm filming, so I want it to look pretty, but you might notice that there's this like fine dust over everything, and this actually comes off of the sweaters, and I notice it as I'm unraveling the sweaters. It's just like a fine coating of dust and fibers everywhere. I wear a mask when I do this. Your lungs are important and you need to protect them. Fine fibers in the air are not great to breathe in. Nose breathing, I guess, could maybe help, but I'm a mouth breather. I don't know if you could ever tell, I have a deviated septum, so when I breathe in through my nose, this side collapses, so that's why I breathe through my mouth. Just protect yourself. When you're doing anything like this or any projects like this, just keep your health and safety in mind.
So version 1 of the winder worked pretty well, but it definitely felt a little helter-skelter and not in the best condition after some moves. So I decided to redesign it with 3D printed parts, and this was that journey.
About a year ago, I talked about how to thrift some nice sweaters, unravel them, and turn them into usable luxury yarn with a little bit of a sweater unwinder that I created. And I thought that this time, because I have access to a lovely 3D printer, I could improve on that sweater unwinder. While it worked, it definitely had a lot of room for improvement. And I will say, as you can see, I did manage to get everything up and running, and I feel like I'm in the middle of magic. It feels like it's magical that I have these machines that are working in the background for me. Let's talk about why I decided to create basically an electronic skein winder, also called my sweater unraveler, and the entire process and steps that I went through in order to design it and have it working. So firstly, why would you want to go this route? I first got this idea because I was watching some other YouTube videos, especially because a sweater quantity's worth of wool can be incredibly expensive to buy. Versus when I look in my local thrift stores, I can get extra fine merino sweaters. I can even get cashmere sweaters for under $10. It does require work, but it does mean that from the monetary sense, it is a lot less expensive for me to get a thrifted sweater and reuse it. There are a few ways that you can do this. I think the most cost-effective way is to do it by hand. You just roll it into a skein around your arm. I have done that process. It takes a long time, so you're not spending money, but you are spending time. which you can't really ever get back. The other option is that you can actually get a swift, which can be relatively inexpensive, and then you can use that swift to unravel the yarn. You might be thinking, why not use a ball winder? I have done that too, but I do find that wool tends to hold the memory of the stitches. It gets a lot of waves and kinks in it, which makes it harder to reknit. So I prefer to create a skein and then wash and dry it with a little bit of tension so that it can remove that memory of the stitches that it was knit into in the factory. I had been doing it that way for a few months when I decided that I was just very exhausted, and I motorized one of my Swifts, but there were some hiccups with it. It was really unwieldy and large. It took up a lot of space, and so it was easy for me to knock over. There was no adjustment really on the tension of the skein, so it was actually really tough for me to get off the skein winder once it was done. And I also ended up breaking the pegs off of the skein winder because the tension it was under was so high when it was unraveling sweaters. Now, with a 3D printer and with all of those issues previously in mind, I thought that was the perfect opportunity to try to make another electronic skein winder. Let me go over some of the various iterations that I did in order to get to this final version. Well, kind of final. We'll talk about it. Step number one was to figure out how to mount this bearing into my eventual skein winder. I knew I wanted the bearing because I wanted to reduce the friction of the point where the center axle goes through the hole that supports it going from the motor to the skein winder. And so my first task was to figure out what was the best dimensions and size for the 3D printed bit that would hold this bearing. So I printed a few test prints until I finally got the one that would fit perfectly. And then I could design the rest of my yarn winder around that. I initially took a lot of heavy inspiration from the first skein winder that I created, and I thought about putting it standing on a desk and then having the axle of kind of like I think it's called an Amish Swift, same as the one before, right in front of it. This had a few issues. The first is that I was limited by the size that my printer could print. This is the maximum height, which is 10 inches. And when you have a cross in front of it with enough clearance to not hit the bottom here, you are not making a skein that is 1 yard large. It's a pretty small, dense skein, and that could be fine, but I know that with the quantities of yarn that I'm handling, I wanted a bit bigger size. I did this as a rough draft print too, so there's a few like cracks and things, and it's not a very good print. It just was hopefully enough just to test it out. I printed it quick and dirty, basically. And I just didn't like how unstable it was either, and it would require me to use a separate clamp to clamp it on the table. Just seemed unwieldy and like it was going to break like my last one, which is when I kind of had a brainwave when I sat this on my desk. I thought, what if I didn't have as long of a front piece and I just let it hang over the edge so that the cross pieces, the front swift part, could hang over the edge of my desk, and then I could make it as big or as small as I wanted. So I went back to the drawing board, or actually CADing program, to redesign that. And I came up with this version, which is very cute, much smaller, much more compact than this larger version. You'll also notice a difference here in the height, and that's because I mismeasures some things. I do have a set of calipers I've been using to measure everything, but still I managed to get it wrong. So I fixed the height so that the axle was at the right spot on the motor, and I also changed the screw holes a little bit so that I could mount the motor onto the bracket a little bit easier. Again, all draft, so I had some printing errors, but that didn't really matter to me. I was just trying to understand how this could work the best. I would plant this on the edge of my desk. I had a separate clamp that I could clamp on and clamp it to my table, but the problem was that the clamp was really wide. And I could go out and get different size clamps, and I was considering doing that so that, because if the clamp is this far out, I'd have to make the axle really, really long in order for that skein arms to not interfere with the clamp. And that felt like I was going to make the whole piece a lot more unstable, which is when I had my final brainwave of why am I making the clamp separate when I've already made a yarn winder with a clamp as a part of it? Why not 3D print my clamp into my skein winder and have it integrated so that my motor and all the axle could sit right at the edge of the desk? And that is how we finally got the final version so far of the clamp that will hold the motor and axle bearing
for my skein winder. The next bit, I guess, was figuring out the cross arms of my skein winder, and that I went back and forth a little bit. So to get exactly 1.5 yards, I did some calculations. I had purchased some pieces of wood that I thought were about the right size-ish. I knew I'd have to cut them down, but I thought they were about correct. And in order to cut it to that dimension, which is like right between 19 and 20 inches, I would have to cut up both pieces of wood. My pieces of wood are 36 inches long, and rather than cut into two, I decided, I mean, 18 is close enough. It's not going to be like the full size skein, but it'll be just a little bit under if I cut it directly in half. And that's what I ended up doing. I also wanted to make sure that when I lined up the two plates on top of each other, that I had routed some notches into them. So I used my router. I got a router for the first time and used it to create those notches. Wow, that's very dramatic lighting. You can barely see me. I'm so sorry. I just need to give you a quick update because I have to really run out the door if I'm going to make this on time before things shut down. So I'm trying to put the router together. And the reason I got this particular router is because my parents have a whole bunch of these other sets with the batteries. Turns out these batteries are not compatible with this router. But there's some in stock and they're actually on special clearance right now. So I am going to go run out the door right now and rush to get some batteries for this router. It would be nice if I could do the routing today. I'll see you in a second, hopefully with some batteries. Like 1.5 hours later, and I have the battery that I need. I was going to do this outside, but the sun has now set and it is, I mean, it was cold today, but when the sun sets, it's really cold. So I'm wondering where, oh, maybe in my hallway. I think that might be a good place if I can find a table to clamp this to, which is really funny. I was talking to my dad. I'm like, oh, I'm at the hardware store and I'm about to buy a router. Do you have a router? I don't want to buy another one if you already have one. He's like, yeah, where do you need the internet? Oh no, not that kind of router. I know you have plenty of those routers, but I mean like the tool. So that was good. Anyway, we got the battery. Let's clamp this somewhere secure. With the notches created, that was, you know, a bit of back and forth and misunderstandings, but we got there at the end of the day and it was really fun. I loved using the router. The pieces fit together, but I mean, it's my first time using a router, so they weren't really all that great, and the wood pieces still had a lot of play between the two of them. And I spoke about this a little bit with my dad. My dad and I love brainstorming. I think he's where I got all of my tinkering from. He tinkers all the time too. So we talked about it a little bit and he recommended like a front plate. In Germany, a lot of the old houses have these like cross plates built into the walls in order to stabilize them from shifting and moving too much to make the buildings unstable. I forget exactly what there's a German name for them and I wouldn't even know the English translation and I forgot the German name anyway. So I'm just going to call it my front plate. And he recommended that I design one of those for my particular Swift in order to add that stability that's needed. I decided to round off the edges a little bit so it looks a little bit like a 4-leaf clover-ish, or maybe like a little flower. I don't know. I think it looks very cute. I'm very happy with that design. And I attached that as well as the bars that would hold the yarn as it's being wound onto the skein winder. I wanted to have a little bit of a cup that the yarn would sit in, but I didn't want that cup to be too deep so that when I wound up the yarn, I couldn't get it off the side. And so I came up with the idea of one of the arms being flexible. So I can unscrew the nut a little bit and there's a channel so that I can move that arm to the side and it'll slide down, allowing just enough room to get the yarn off of the Swift without having to add so much force to it. So I think that worked out really well, although an improvement could be rather than having a typical nut, I can use a wing nut there so I can more easily undo it and retighten it just with my fingers because it is a little, it's like, it's a hair
tough to do it and to tighten it enough. The other design note about the arms that you might notice is that it has a brace to it. So it has that triangular brace underneath it. I mean, I designed it a little bit to have like a little curve and all of that, but the main bit that I wanted was extra stability so that the arms didn't slowly start bending and cracking inwards, which is what happened on my last skein winder. That is the current iteration of my skein winder. I'm very happy with it. There are a few things I would still improve, like adding a wing nut. The through axle to the skein winder works very well, but it was very hard to drill. So I think what I might do in the future is that front plate, I would actually extrude the depth of the wood through there, and the inner diameter being exactly what I need for my axle. And then I can just drill it a little bit bigger, and it doesn't have to be exactly centered because the axle will rest on that 3D printed part rather than on the wood itself. So I think that would be better for me to do in the future, but it works right now as is, and I'm very pleased with it. So why don't I take this sweater and undo the seams and put our skein winder to the test. Let's begin by removing all of the tags from the inside of the sweater and then undoing the seams. The seam should be sewn with this chain stitch that you can see right here, and you should follow the V's up to the top. So go in the direction of the V's to the top ends of the sleeves and cut through one or two of the loops, undo a few more, and then when you have a loose end, the nice thing about the chain stitch is all you have to do is pull and it will unravel down the entire seam. It should at least pretty easily. These commercially made sweaters are typically put together all in the same order, so if you're undoing one of these, I recommend starting with the arms and then going to the sides, then the shoulders, then the collar. Then I get a little bit of that particular panel unraveled before I set it up on my skein winder. All of these extra bits that you get from the seams I'm saving because I have some ideas in the future as to what exactly I'm going to use that for. Now we can set it up on our sweater unraveler or electronic skein winder, and look how beautifully it works. I also created this little bit of a yarn guide so that it keeps the yarn as centered as possible across the little arms that the skein winder has so that we're not falling off quite as much. And you also saw that sometimes the sweater pulls a little bit, so it protects the skein winder a little bit from some of the shenanigans that can happen when you're trying to unwind your sweater. And all that's left to do at this point is to sit back and enjoy watching this machine unravel some beautiful wool for you to reknit in the future. I am so pleased. My new sweater unraveler has worked so well. I have these 4 lovely skeins of superfine merino wool that I can reknit or remake into something completely different. I know last time I had some people ask me for the files to 3D print the yarn ball adapting thing to make it motorized. I know you'll probably be interested in having that as well for this sweater unwinder. but they are still kind of a little bit in a rough state. They need at least one more iteration and a little bit of a cleanup before I'm comfortable releasing them. But if that's the case, I will let you all know, for those of you who have a 3D printer, so you can print it for yourself. Now that I have an unraveler that works pretty well and pretty consistently, like I can unravel things pretty regularly with this one, I always keep an eye out for vintage sweaters, and I found this absolutely beautiful vintage sweater to unravel for a vintage knit pattern. So let's watch how the unraveling process went.
I love perusing the thrift store for beautiful natural fiber sweaters, and I was absolutely drawn to the color of this sweater. When I looked at the tag, I realized it was 100% cashmere for less than $5. The only trouble is that this isn't really my size, and it's also covered in mouth holes, and there's some significant light fading on the yarn as well. But since the quality of this sweater is so good, I love the color so much, I thought I would see if it would be worth it to unravel this sweater to harvest the yarn to reknit into something else. So today I'm going to see what is the dollar per hour that it takes to transform this $5 thrift sweater into a pile of maybe hundreds of dollars of yarn. We'll have to see. The first step in kind of harvesting this yarn is to take it apart at the seams. Let's start by investigating those a little bit closer and seeing how we can best attack this sweater. I wish that I could have you all feel how soft this cashmere is. It is so incredibly soft. It's really nice. One of the things you might be noticing, and that I'm noticing, is that cashmere tends to have a halo to it, which means a little bit of fuzziness around the outside, and that can be a recipe for felting, which can make unraveling a sweater a little bit more difficult. But I'm not seeing that this is too prohibitively felted. It doesn't look so bad. This left sleeve is definitely the most affected by the fading and the moth holes, so we'll see how much yarn we need. I have a pattern in mind that I want to reknit this into. These seams are perfect for unraveling. They're chain stitched together, which means that if we find the correct end, we just pick it open, we can just pull on one thread and it'll come undone all the way down the seam. So take off everything that I can while hopefully keeping the big panels intact. Okay, I now have nearly 5 pieces. I've got one arm, the other arm with all the moth holes and discoloration. I've got the collar and the front and back. But see, this is why I find unraveling sweaters so fascinating, because this is a new joining technique at the ribbing that I've never encountered before. So I don't want to cut anything apart in case some of this is salvageable or it comes apart once I start unraveling it. Now, the next thing that we need to do is start finding like a little end on one of these panels and hook it up to my unraveler. Really quickly, before we jump over to that, some of you might be having a question of how can I trust having a piece with obvious moth hole damage in it into the rest of my yarn collection? How do I be sure that none of the other moths are going to make it? This is what I personally do, but I have 2 methods of removing any potential infestation problems. One is I bake my yarn at a very low temperature. This only works for natural materials. If you do it with plastic, it's going to melt. And if you do it with natural materials and they get too hot, they can also char and burn and catch on fire. So be careful with that one, but that one does go very quickly. I put it on a very low temperature, like the lowest my oven can go, which is still pretty hot, for about 30 minutes to an hour. The other method is to freeze it for a few weeks. I've seen museum curators comment in my comments that it's at least, I think, 2 to 3 weeks. So yeah, sometimes if you ever visit me and you open my freezer, you will find sweaters and yarn in my freezer because I'm trying to prevent any infestations spreading in my stash, because I have quite a significant stash and some of it is vintage and antique and I really want to keep them in good condition. Let's move over to my unraveler. It's been a while since you all have seen it, and let's just say I'm a little clumsy, so I've dropped it a few times since the last time I used it. So it needs a little bit of a TLC before we can use it, and I can talk about it if you've never seen it before. What do I even mean when I say my unraveler? Oh, And almost completely forgot to mention, I am keeping track of the time. So right now we are almost exactly 20 minutes in. So it took me 20 minutes to unpick the seams of this sweater. Okay, now to the unraveler. Here is what I have called my sweater unraveler. This is my new and improved version that I created, I believe, last year. So if you're curious about why I designed it this way, how I designed it, how I put it together, feel free to check out that video. In the meantime, I have managed to drop this poor machine more than once. So we are missing 2 arms. I did find 1 arm with the matching bolt and screw and everything, but not both. So if you hear a 3D printing noise in the background, that is indeed my 3D printer. I am printing another arm so that I can use it again, but it is honestly pretty simple in its construction, I think. It's basically a motor that connects through to these arms that kind of looks like a yarn swift, and it rotates. I have variable speed control on this. I'm also missing the bearing that is supposed to sit in here and keep it a little bit more smoothly turning, but I think it'll be okay. But I'm hoping that to unravel 1 sweater, it won't be too bad. I will wait for the 3D printer to finish. Oh, wait! The ball bearing is literally, is it a ball? I don't think it's a ball bearing, but the bearing just slipped off. It must have been on one of the times that I dropped it that it literally just slipped down, and I can just reattach it. Thank goodness. Okay, that'll be a lot less stressful on the motor, so I'm very glad for that. While we're waiting for the 3D printer to finish, this isn't a very new idea. I just think that I haven't myself done the test of how quote unquote worth it is it? Like how much work and time and effort am I putting into this versus the amount of yarn that I get off of it? Is it really worth it? Let's wait for my 3D printer to finish printing the missing arm. I will put this arm back on and I will add the bearing back into my unraveler here, goodness gracious. And then we can start unraveling the first panel of this sweater, and we will cross our fingers that we won't have much tearing. The last time I tried to unravel a cashmere sweater, I gave up because I ripped the threads constantly, which really isn't worth it at the end. So let's see how worth it this sweater is. Okay, so I was just digging through my storage solutions, and anything that's like closed and in drawers and I can't see, I kind of forget about. So no wonder I forgot that I had this, but I had some older prints of these arms. So this isn't the exact arm. The hole is slightly big, and it doesn't have like the little slot to make it easier to take the yarn off, but it works for now. The 3D printer is still printing the other arm, so if this one doesn't work, we can use that one. Let me clamp this down to something, and we will find like a little end of our first sweater to start unraveling. Keep your fingers crossed for me that this isn't going to be too difficult. I don't know. I'm worried. Now that I said that, I'm worried that I said that, but we'll try. We'll try. Okay, to be honest, I'm a little bit worried about the integrity of the clamp. It did split, I'm pretty sure, one of the times that I dropped it. So I might put the 3D printer to work printing another clamp once it's done with the backup arm. But for now, let's see if it still even turns. This is gonna be my first run test in a long time. Also, I'm sorry for all of this mess. It's a bit messy in my room at the moment. Here we go. It does still run, which is a great sign. It is quite unstable, so I am a bit worried, but we're gonna run. We're gonna run with it. We're gonna see. We're gonna see. We're gonna see. Let's see if it works. The clamp is about to fully fail. Ah. Okay. Oh, and I ripped the yarn. That went really poorly. Oops. Okay. I think I'm gonna have to wait until I can print a new clamp potentially, or let me see if I can use a construction clamp. Hold on. All right, so there's a bit of felting
at the place where there were seams. The clamp is helping a lot. So I'm just gonna sit here while the rest of this arm gets done. Wow, with the worst posture ever. I can see that in the viewfinder. Let me get a little bit better posture so I don't ruin my shoulders and my back doing this. And I guess I will see you once this panel is done. I've made it to the cuff where the ribbing is, and I'm trying to figure out how this one is sewn together because it's different from what I have ever experienced before. So I'm trying to see if there's a way. I have to admit, I don't fully understand this cuff construction. I'm just getting a whole bunch of long disconnected pieces. So I might call it there for now. I'm gonna save it just in case I need a little extra for the pattern I'm planning on doing. I might be a little eking tight on that, so I'll save it.
Okay, I'm so excited that we have one sleeve unraveled. Surprisingly, also almost exactly 20 minutes is what it took to do this. I included everything, including all the mistakes in the stopping and the starting. So let me put a few tie-off points into this. The clamp so far is working well enough that I've decided to just leave it be for now. Usually one of the arms, the one that's missing of course, would loosen it and it would drop down, which gives me a little bit of less tension on these, so I'm not afraid of ripping anything. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn a few of these to the side in hopes of giving myself a little bit more wiggle room, and then just very carefully seeing if I can't move this. There we go. I think that works. And look at that, it looks almost like ramen noodles because it has the memory of the stitches that it was in before I unraveled it. So this will need to be washed and let dry to kind of remove a little bit of that memory. We have the first bit unraveled. How much would this be worth? What's your guess? It's pretty light, and I don't know, I have to look up exactly how much money per gram cashmere knitting yarn tends to be, but tell me what your guess is for sleeve number 1. For the second sleeve though, we do have the rip in it, so I know, like the moth holes in it, so I know that we're gonna have longer pieces of yarn, but I might take you a little bit closer in so you can see some more of the process and how this really works a little bit better.
Sleeve 2 is done, and that took 13 minutes. So we're up to 20 minutes for deconstructing it, 20 minutes for sleeve 1, and 13 minutes for sleeve 2, which is 53 minutes, just under an hour. We have the front and back to do, so I guess I'll just keep on unraveling and timing myself for the unraveling and keeping you updated.
Now that I have unwound all of the sections of the sweater, it is time to give it a wash. Not just to clean it, but also to relax a little bit of the memory of this yarn. So I filled up my bathroom sink with some wool wash, so wash that's meant specifically for washing cashmere and woolen products, and I soaked it in nice cool water, trying to wring out a little bit of the memory of the yarn, and also, you know, this is a good potential to really thoroughly clean this yarn as well. After a final rinse in just plain water to make sure that all of the soap is out, I wrung it out, not too much, basically just squeezed out the water and let it hang to dry. And after letting it dry overnight, I am left with this absolutely beautiful yarn. I don't even think that the camera fully captures the color of this yarn. I wish that I could show it to you a little bit better.
All right, after unraveling the sweater and all the different sections, washing and letting this hang dry, I have finished unraveling the sweater. So why don't we go ahead and weigh and see how many grams of yarn that we have. Put your guesses down below. Let me know if you're anywhere close. So 121 grams, that is pretty good. I am so excited. And this is pure cashmere in just the most gorgeous color. I created a spreadsheet with different companies' 100% cashmere yarns to see on average the price per gram that different yarn companies have for cashmere. And it turns out that for 121 grams, on average, we're looking at having just about $110 worth of yarn. I originally paid $5 for this, $4.49 for the sweater, but let's include taxes and round it up to about $5. And I put time into it, right? We don't want to discount the amount of time that I spent on this, so I added up all of the time that I spent unpicking the sweater, unraveling each sleeve, unraveling the front and back, and the washing time that it took. And that means that I spent just under 2 hours on unraveling the sweater with my unraveler. If we take a look at this from the point of view of minimum wage, where I live, minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. That means that my entire sweater costed me, I think, just under $20, including the purchase price. Let's look at it from the point of view of a livable wage, which I think in my area I looked it up is somewhere around $25 an hour, which would be just about $46 for this amount of wool. So I put in about $46 to get this in terms of original purchasing price and time spent unwinding it, if we're looking at about $25 an hour. And the average cost of this wool is $110. So I feel like that is worth it, at least for me and at least for the fact that I have the unraveling machine. I personally think it was really worth it to unravel that sweater for its yarn, especially because I had a particular vintage sweater pattern in mind that was somewhat successful, kind of. Well, you let me know. So this is what I ended up doing with that unraveled, beautiful cashmere yarn.
I thrifted a $5 cashmere sweater and I unraveled it to harvest the yarn to reknit it into a sweater that doesn't have moth holes or light fading and fits me a little bit better than the original sweater did. This is all the yarn that I was able to get from that sweater. And as we talked about last time, between the cost of the original sweater and the time it took to unravel it, it's about $45, $46, which on average, if I bought it new, would actually cost me about $110. I will be using my knitting machine to reknit this up. I had some questions about gauge and the weight of the yarn, so why don't I first go ahead and wind this up into balls of yarn and we can discuss it as I am making the gauge swatch on my knitting machine. I've got my yarn all caked up now. If you're interested in my knitting machines, I've got a few playlists of me making sweaters with my knitting machine. This is actually a sweater from an unraveled other thrifted sweater that I then reknit on this knitting machine. I had some questions about the weight of this yarn, and machine-made, commercially knit, machine-made sweaters. That's a lot of adjectives. I don't know what is the right order. They are usually made with incredibly thin yarn. So when I hold it up to my little yarn gauge here, it's lace, potentially cobweb weight. And that is very, very light, especially to knit with. But usually when I unravel these commercially knit sweaters, I will hold at least 2 of the threads together. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know if I have enough for the pattern I'm planning on making. I know you might be wondering, what sweater am I planning on knitting? I will show it to you after we hit gauge, hopefully, with our gauge swatch here. And there's our gauge swatch. So let's measure and see which tension is the right tension for about 7.5 stitches per inch. So based on my gauge swatch, I think we are going to be at about tension 5, but now I think I can finally show you the exact pattern that I want to knit up now.
I don't even really know where to start. Between the last clip and this one, this room might be a little bit echoey, and that's because so much has happened. I've moved. So welcome to my new space. This is just one of the new spaces where I'll be doing my work, which is really exciting. I'm also just getting over being sick, so please excuse my voice too. I think we had just done a gauge swatch with doubly held yarn, but I realized that we're coming up on springtime and cashmere is warm. It's soft, but it is definitely warm. And this is the sweater pattern that I chose is not exactly one that I would say keeps you warm. It's a little bit more off the shoulder. Have I revealed the sweater pattern yet? What we're going to be making? It is a 1950s
off the shoulder sweater, which I think is so cute. But again, this isn't really a sweater pattern that I would say I would wear on a cold night. So as I was re-looking at that gauge swatch that I knit, I kind of wanted to test out what just a singly held yarn gauge swatch would look like. I've created two, and I think I like it better. I like the drape better. I like the look better. It's a little airy and see-through, but I think that serves that sweater design a little bit better. I'm gonna be honest, I did a poor job of recording what I did here, so I don't fully know what tension I knit these gauge swatches at. So I'm gonna redo the tension of these gauge swatches. All right, gauge swatch time. Again, I guess.
Okay, so would I call this project a success? And I think honestly, I never want to call something necessarily outright a failure, but this was a struggle for me. The process wasn't very relaxing because it's been a while since I've done any kind of knitting. I'm also in the middle of a move. I think it's just like, and the end result isn't exactly what I was hoping to get either, but I'm glad that I did it because it reminded me of like how useful the knitting machine is to me, and when things are working generally okay, how much I do enjoy working on it. It is a little frustrating sometimes when you have this final vision of a project in mind and you don't come anywhere close to it, even though you were hoping to maybe be able to get somewhat close to that design. I think if I did it again, I would be able to potentially, but you know, there was just so many variables involved. And I think also this top, I think, is in a much better configuration like this with a little ruffly collar. I did pull the shoulders and sleeves down to wear it in the way that it's shown on the original pattern design. But the problem is that this is kind of like a T construction. So you end up with extra fabric in the armpit that you wouldn't if you did set-in sleeves. And when you pull the shoulders down, that's even more extra fabric underneath the armpits than there would be when you have set-in sleeves. You know, I've owned tops that are meant to be worn off the shoulder, and it's almost like you cut out, like instead of the sleeves going this way, they go this way, not vertically, but horizontally. And then I just couldn't figure out the yoke. It could be that it's because I don't have, you know, the crocheted edge with the elastic on it. I think overall, I'm glad I did it, but it was harder than I was expecting it to be. What do you think? Was it worth it, or should I have maybe saved the yarn to use for something else or tried a pattern that might have worked better with the unraveled yarn? Or do you think that this ended up being a decent enough top that I can make some use out of the unraveled sweater and yarn that I have? I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail, but now that I kind of had my unraveling process set up, I wanted to specifically find a yarn to remake a vintage sweater. So this is the process of finding that correct sweater to unravel in order to remake a vintage sweater.
This is one of my favorite vintage sweaters to wear when it starts getting warm out. I think it's also such a fun spring color, but it is starting to show the fact that it is probably around 80 years old at this point. In order to preserve this sweater and to give myself the option of having it in some more colors, or at least maybe in one other color, I want to see if I can find some sweaters at the thrift store today that I can unravel to use as the yarn for this sweater remake. There are going to be a few things that we have to keep in mind when we're doing this. First of all, the weight of the yarn is important so that we can get the right gauge and fit and drape of the sweater. We need to make sure that it's something that can unravel. I also prefer natural fibers over anything acrylic or polyester. And then we have the added difficulty that we are going into the warmer weather, which means that I don't even know if the thrift store even has a sweater section anymore. So let's cross our fingers and head off to the thrift store and see if there's anything that we can find that would be at all appropriate to remake this sweater. As I was heading into the thrift store, I thought it would be fun to add a little extra challenge of setting myself a goal of not going over $40 for the price of sweaters that I would be unraveling to try to recreate this original sweater. And as I turned the corner, I was actually really relieved because I realized that there was still a section of sweaters left for me to browse through. As I was browsing through the racks, one thing that I'm looking for are the seams, the seam constructions on the sweaters. If you see anything overlocked or serged, then you know that that has been cut and is not a good candidate for unraveling and reusing the yarn. You're looking for chain stitched together edges. That is your best bet. The other thing that I'm looking for is fiber content, of course. I found quite a few sweaters where the tags have been cut out of, which I fully understand. I do the same thing. I'm very, very sensitive to tags. So I usually pass on those, but there was one where it feels so much like wool that I'm willing to take a chance on it, and I want to do a burn test. So this is going to be an interesting one because I want to kind of take bets on if we think that this is a wool sweater or not. So after browsing all the sweater racks and looking at the fiber content and the colors and the yarn weights, I found a few sweaters that I thought would be good candidates to try and recreate my original vintage sweater that I love so much. I ended up getting 4 sweaters, and as I went to the checkout, I did not think that I would be getting this close, but I was amazed. I ended up getting it for, including tax, just under $40. So that was a success. Now that I am home with my haul of sweaters, the first thing that I like to do is always make sure that they didn't come home with any extra passengers. So I like to do it by baking it in the oven because that is a pretty quick method, and because I tend to pick out pieces with mostly natural yarns. There is one mystery yarn in here, but I'm gonna take my chances and I'm just gonna watch it very closely. So let's go ahead and get all of these in the oven. Cross your fingers for me that we're not going to be melting a sweater accidentally or charring anything. I've done that before too. You can do that with a wool. So just be careful when you're doing it this way. The sweaters have all survived the oven, thank goodness. Again, I don't know that I would recommend this, but it worked. I think I'm going to start with these 2 sweaters and do a burn test. I'm also going to find a 100% wool thread so we can do a comparison of a burn test from a 100% wool, a wool acrylic blend, and this mystery sweater, and we will see if we can't determine what this might be. But I just realized that my unraveler, the clamp is not structurally sound anymore. I should reprint one. It kept on falling off the last time. Let me first set up the 3D printer to print that really quickly so that can be working while I conduct the burn test. I think this is the best place to set it up. I'm gonna hit go on the print, and then we can go ahead and do the burn test while this print is printing. Also, if you've been seeing these wood planks in the background and what I'm sitting on, and you're wondering what that is, this is an antique barn loom that I just picked up all the way from Vermont and Massachusetts. I'm so excited to put it together. If you want to know more, feel free to subscribe to my Patreon because I'll be putting a little bit more behind the scenes information there, but eventually also on this channel, you'll see more about this antique barn loom. So this is a future video in the making. I'm so excited to share more about it.
I started off by burn testing a 100% cashmere yarn. You can see here that it burns easily and there aren't like little balls left over. It fully comes away when I rub it in my fingers and it turns into char. So that's a sign of a natural fiber. This next sweater we know is a 50-50 blend of wool and acrylic. And so we get char, but we also get this little ball that you can kind of see drops out of my fingers after I rub it together. That's the plastic bit of it melting. This is now our mystery sweater. So what could it be? We are hoping to see some sort of char forming and less of like a plastic ball left over, but as we see it, there's really no char that comes off at all, just these balls of plastic that's melted back. So I'm pretty sure that this is a 100% synthetic sweater material, unfortunately, which is not really the news I was hoping to hear because I love this color and I love this yarn, but I don't exactly know what to do with this sweater now. So instead I went back to the white sweater that we bought, which is a acrylic natural yarn wool blend, and I started unpicking the chain stitch seams in order to get the separate panels to be able to unwind it on our unraveler.
Okay, the clamp is reprinted for the unraveler, so this should be good to go. While that was printing, I also took the second to kind of get the unraveling started for all the different pieces. I think that the collar bit, this bit, is gonna go the easiest. It is just one string that makes up the entirety of this collar. As I was preparing the other panels, the front and back panel and the sleeves, I have a bit of a concern. We'll have to see when we get there. We'll start with the easiest bit, but I have a bit of a concern that we might have to address. I haven't figured out a design solution for it yet, so I might pose that question to you all. But first, let's do the collar and then we'll talk about what the challenge is with the rest of the panels. All right, let's turn it on, see how it works. God! I just created a big knot. Oh no. Oh, and Nutella came in right away to run and check on me. Hi, baby. Thank you. Slow it down just a hair. That speed is a little intense. It's a little felted at the end seams, so the yarn wants to stick a bit. So I kind of have to unstick the yarn. Well, that's not a good sign. I broke that clamp. But we got this off. Looks like that. Isn't it cute? I absolutely love it. I think that looks awesome. Okay, so I need to reprint a clamp. And I guess while that's reprinting, I will tell you what I think the complication is with these other panels. When I was investigating these panels, you can see that there are also two yarns coming off of this, but what I think is happening is that they are interchanged. So if this finger is yarn A and this finger is yarn B, what I think is happening is that yarn A is knit for a row and then yarn B is knit for a row. And then, let me start this way. Yarn A is knit for a row, yarn B is knit for a row, then yarn A and then B and then A and then B and then A and then B. So if you try to unravel it and I pull on yarn B, I get stuck here because I can't get past yarn A. So I'm going to have to be unraveling two yarns simultaneously. I've done this before. I have the unraveler working on one and I'm manually unraveling the other. So I think I'll be doing something similar for this. But you can see it here. Here's the two yarns and they're kind of stacked in terms of the rows that they're coming off of. And if I were just to take the top one and try to unravel that once I get there, no matter how much I try to pull on that, I'm going to break it before it unravels because I need to take yarn B and then unravel that row first, and then it keeps going. I would like to try to come up with a modification to my design to handle sweaters knit like this, because this is like the third time I've run into it. That's going to require a lot more thinking. Maybe you guys have some ideas. So this is kind of where I put that question to the test for you. Let me go check on the 3D print for the arm replacement, and then we can maybe get started on unraveling a little bit more of these sweaters. We've got the arm replacement on, is we're going to put the first string on the unraveler. So the unraveler is going to handle that one. And then I have my ball winder right here that's going to wind it into a ball. And then we put this end on the ball winder. And then we're just going to go very slow. Okay, so we're stopped. So we have to use the ball winder. Okay. And we're kind of, oop, 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 oop. I accidentally missed. So here we go, unraveling at the same time. And get that going really slowly. I feel like I wish I could look in two separate places at once, like a chameleon. Oh my gosh, okay, that was not easy, but we did manage to unravel the sweater. These do need to be washed because it still has the memory of the old stitches in it, right, Nutella? But I'm very excited with the yarn that we got. I think this is gonna be so fun to re-knit into that vintage sweater. So if you wanna see that, feel free to subscribe. If you want the instructions on how to make the unraveler, feel free to sign up for my email newsletter, which is in the link down below. And honestly, also please help me. What should I do with these other ones? I have the one sweater I unraveled that I was hoping would be a natural fiber and is not, so I don't really know what to do with the rest of this sweater. Please tell me any ideas. And I have 2 more that I could unravel in the future whose content I like and the color I like. So maybe I can make another version of the vintage sweater. I'm so excited.
So it took me quite a bit to actually finally unravel this sweater, the one that I ended up choosing, but that meant that I was now free to recreate my favorite vintage sweater from it. And the process was tough, but it was successful enough at the end.
This sweater is one of my absolute favorite vintage sweaters to wear in the warm and hot weather. But for a few reasons, I am getting more and more nervous to wear this. So a few weeks ago, I unraveled a thrifted sweater in order to use that yarn to try to recreate this particular one. Things haven't worked out exactly as I planned. There's been many mistakes along the way, as is usual for my knitting machine. But let's start by first measuring out this sweater, writing down the dimensions, making a gauge swatch with a new yarn, and redoing all the calculations to hopefully try and knit this up on my knitting machine.
I am in love with this sweater. It did test my patience at times, that is for sure, but overall I am so happy with how it turned out. I actually, funnily enough, had this particular dress in mind when I was thinking about designing this particular sweater because I love the original vintage and I always thought that I would want to wear it underneath this dress, which is a hand-sewn vintage dress that I've always enjoyed wearing, but the material is quite coarse and I have very sensitive skin, so it would irritate me a little bit on the shoulders and around the waist. So I thought, what if I had the same vintage sweater to wear underneath it, but in a color that I think complements it a little bit better, which would be this like cream white color. And I think it worked out perfectly for that purpose. It's not exactly the same, right? There's a few differences. So the sleeves ended up a bit tighter. The lace pattern is obviously different than the original because I just used the closest punch card that I had available. I still don't have any buttons sewn on. I didn't get to it this time, and there are some ends I have to weave in, but overall I am so happy with how this turned out, and this is from my recycled yarn. Let me know if you are interested in me actually diving into the original lace pattern of that particular sweater and recreating it 100% because I have some more yarn from unraveled sweaters that I could use in order to knit this up. I've also been toying with the idea of if I do figure out the original lace pattern, should I write it up as a sweater pattern for you all to knit as well and enjoy? I don't know, let me know. What are your thoughts? What do you think about this particular cute little vintage sweater? I personally love it. It is 1000% my style, and I'm so glad that I went through the slight headache and troubles of making it, especially now a few days later from like the worst of it. I think it's 1000% worth it. All right, so this is kind of my unraveling and reknitting journey so far into thrifting sweaters and reusing the yarn to knit my own, especially the vintage patterns. But you might be wondering, like, where am I gonna take this in the future? And to be honest, I am currently sitting on a treasure trove of luxury sweaters that just need to have a different life breathed into them. I have been watching, you can buy lots of these sweaters online, literally like 10, 15, 20, 25 of these sweaters that are basically meant for upcycle. That's how they're worded. So they're felted, they have moth holes, they have stains, they have light damage. They're not in a condition to be donated and then reused as they are. They need to be upcycled in some way. Ideally, I would like to unravel a lot of them in order to recycle the yarn, reknit the yarn myself, but some of them just aren't going to be able to be unraveled. If the sweater is too felted, you cannot unravel it, unfortunately. The fibers are too meshed together. if the holes are too bad, if the stains are too bad. So there's a few conditions where unraveling just might not be possible. So I want to try out different recycling methods than just unraveling. The one I kind of have already hinted at and I made a video about recently is basically shredding a sweater and then respinning it into new yarn. I was semi-successful in doing that in the past, but I want to dive way more into that process. And then there's a third thing that I found out about recently, and the hint is that I think I want to use it for letter writing, if that is enough of a hint. But yeah, I have big plans for recycling sweaters that can't be worn anymore. Please let me know if you'd like to see a little bit more of that process, because I'm planning on designing some machines, trying to build some of them. And if you have any ideas on what my third recycling idea might be, or if you have others that I haven't even considered yet, I would love to hear what you think. Thank you so much for sitting down and watching. I know this is a long one. It was a compilation of a lot of the things that I've done already, but I hope that it kind of brings together this 3 to 4 year journey that I've been on already so far on trying to figure out a better process for me personally to recycle sweaters that can't be worn in their current state into something that can be used and loved and enjoyed. I know we all have limited time, so thank you so much for deciding to spend some of that with me, and I hope to see you all again very, very soon. Bye!